Good evening and welcome to the York Civil War Roundtable. My name is Adam Bentz and I am the Assistant Director of Library and Archives at the York County History Center, and we're very happy to co-host this event as we have for almost a year now during this pandemic. I would like to, if I can navigate there we go. I would like to go through some upcoming events at the History Center before we get to some other information and before I introduce tonight's speakers. And if you'll bear with me, I would appreciate that. Obviously tonight, I'm hoping we're all here to attend the Civil War Roundtable and our webinar, The Irish Brigade, the Fearless Sons of Erin, presented by Chris Army and Rick Schroeder, and I'll be introducing them in just a few minutes. On March 23rd, that's this coming Tuesday at 11 o'clock a.m., we will be presenting a pre-recorded video done by Christine Cooper, who is our Manager of Public Programs. She will be presenting one in her long series of 18th century cooking demonstrations. Like I said, this will be pre-recorded, but we will be premiering it on YouTube on March 23rd. That's at 11 a.m. Obviously, you can always go to YouTube after that and check it out. On April 1st, that is Thursday, April 1st at 10 o'clock in the morning, we are very happy to announce that the York County History Center will be reopening. We've been closed, as many of you are well aware. We've been closed since right around Thanksgiving of 2020, but our Board of Trustees has talked extensively about the safety and precautions and has worked with the staff on what we need to do to safely reopen. And I hate to make predictions, but we are seeing some good positive signs about where the country and the world is heading. And so we will be reopening on April 1st. We strongly encourage anyone who's interested in touring our various museums or in doing research in the library and archives, please contact us in advance and make a reservation through our online system, or give us a call, send us an email, and see how we can help you and see what the best way of visiting us is. We are maintaining various precautions as we did last summer and last fall when we reopened after the initial shutdown. So please check our website if you have any questions, or give us a call, or check out, you can always reach out to us in the library directly. Our emails are located under the Contact Us section of the History Center website. So by all means, we'll be happy to see you. We'll be happy to keep everybody safe, but we are reopening on the 1st. So on April 11th, that's Sunday, April 11th, we will be hosting the South Central Pennsylvania Genealogical Society. This meeting will take place. We'll start with a business meeting at 2:15, as it has in the past. We will be hosting the SCPGS in person that day. However, we will also be broadcasting it live on Zoom. And the subject of the presentation on April 11th is Mother Cumberland, Researching with Cumberland County Records. This will be presented by Kara Curtis of the Cumberland County Historical Society. Then on April 15th, that is the third Thursday of the month of April, the library will be hosting a webinar from Hampton Plantation, Maryland to York, Pennsylvania, The Road to Freedom. This will be presented by Dr. Cheryl LaRoche. So we'll be welcoming her to the History Center virtually. That will be a Zoom webinar, as you can see. And then I'd like to present our upcoming Civil War Roundtable webinar. At this point in the month of April, the Civil War Roundtable will be remaining virtual. So our next presentation on April 21st, that's Wednesday, third Wednesday in April at 7 p.m., that will be a webinar. And the title of the presentation is A Good-Natured Drudge, The Untold Story of Edmund Ned Spangler, presented by Bob Bowser. Spangler is usually portrayed as the willing drunk lackey of John Wilkes Booth. This talk sets out to correct this misconception. following Ned's tale from his humble beginnings in York through his days in Baltimore, Washington, and Dry Tortugas, Florida. It culminates with his untimely death in Bryantown, Maryland. We will explore the ongoing controversies over Ned's arrest and conviction, as well as his attitude toward serving time in prison. Additionally, we will examine the intricate details and friendships that made up the life of this complex yet neglected character in the Lincoln assassination conspiracy. So it sounds like, perennial topic obviously is the Lincoln assassination, has a lot of local connections, as most of you are well aware. So we'll be welcoming Mr. Bowser to present this information about, I guess I should say, with some caution, York County's own Ned Spangler. Just a word of thanks to the York Civil War Roundtable. We've had a great partnership with them for many years at the History Center, and we haven't been able to see many people in person, obviously. We haven't been doing that at all for several months, as you know, but we owe our thanks from the History Center to Kathy Friel, Program Director, and to Scott Mingus and Scott Rosenau, who are both Assistant Program Directors. They've been working behind the scenes during this whole time that we've been online, putting a great slate of speakers together. Two of them will be speaking for us in just a few moments, but we're looking forward to going forward and having a great partnership. We're looking forward to April's event. And at some point in April, we'll be working with Kathy and members of the roundtable to see where we're going to go next, whether we're going to try in person after that point, or whether we're going to stay online for the time to come. So tonight's speakers, I'd like to introduce Chris Army. He has been a licensed battlefield guide since 2015, and he's led tours for folks ranging from Gettysburg Park visitors to Civil War roundtables like ourselves to West Point cadets. So he's talked to lots of different groups over time. He is a member of the faculty of the Gettysburg Foundation's In the Footsteps of Leaders Leadership Development Program and the former chair of the Adams County Historical Society. He has written articles for Blue and Gray and America's Civil War magazines. He regularly appears on Gettysburg and leadership-related podcasts. He lives in Dover, which of course is in York County, with his wife Connie. And he will be speaking tonight with Dr. Rick Schroeder, who has been a licensed battlefield guide at Gettysburg since 2016. He graduated from the University of Notre Dame in 1977. He then attended Northwestern Medical School, graduating in 1981. He completed his orthopedic surgery residency at Indiana University in Indianapolis. Fellowships in knee surgery and orthopedic trauma followed after that. He practiced at Conemaugh Hospital's Level 1 Trauma Center as the Director of Orthopedic Trauma in Johnstown, Pennsylvania for 33 years and is recently retired. And Rick, of course, spoke to us last fall, so we're happy to welcome him back. At that point, one more thing before I get started. Most of you are aware of this, but we do appreciate if you could save your questions till the end of tonight's presentation. And I will be moderating the questions for the speakers, but please put them into the chat if possible. I also monitor the Q&A function on Zoom, but the chat's just a little bit easier to use. And we will try to get to everybody's question before we finish up tonight. So at that point, I'm going to stop my share and turn things over to Chris.
Thank you, Adam. And now comes the most complex part of the evening, and that is getting the technology going on our end here. So bear with me for a second as we go ahead and get that going here. So Rick, can you got a thumbs up there? You
Yep.
can see the screen?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful.
You look good.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. And again, thank you, Adam. Appreciate everybody joining. We decided that we would show you our lovely mugs in our uniforms so that if you see us out on the field, you can say hello. But I think Rick would agree. We both have had very interesting careers outside of Gettysburg and outside of history. but being a licensed battlefield guide is the best job that we've ever had. I think Rick would agree with me on that.
Yeah.
And get to meet a lot of wonderful people and really dig into a lot of great history. So if there's anybody out there thinking about becoming a licensed battlefield guide someday, highly encourage it. Highly encourage it. It's a great thing. So tonight we're going to talk about the Irish Brigade. I think today's date is significant. Rick, is that right?
Yeah, slightly. I mean, 158 years ago.
Yeah. So, rather than give you a lot of detail on all the battles that the Irish Brigade fought in, and they fought in some of the major battles, you'll see throughout our talk that they really took a lot of casualties over their time in the Army of the Potomac. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but a lot of what we're going to cover is really stories in and around and in between those battles and kind of how the Irish Brigade gets started. So, to kind of cover the basics here at Gettysburg, we'll focus on that for the local folks here in York. The Second Brigade of the First Division of Hancock's Corps at Gettysburg, the Second Corps. So 212. That's a pretty easy number to remember as far as their order of battle. But when you take a look at the statistics in the Army of the Potomac, the Irish Brigade lost more men than any other brigade in the First Division of the Second Corps. And the First Division of the Second Corps lost more men than any other federal division. In fact, the Irish Brigade, over the course of their existence in the American Civil War, lost over 4,000. 961 of them killed or mortally wounded. That ranks third among all the brigades in the Union Army. So the units at Gettysburg that we'll focus on here a little bit in the middle, the 63rd New York, the 69th New York, the Fighting 69th, you'll hear a lot about them, the 88th New York, known all together here at Gettysburg, as really what a lot of people think of as the Irish Brigade. But there's two other regiments, and that's the 28th Massachusetts, the 116th Pennsylvania. Now notice, most of these, with the exception of the 28th Massachusetts, are not in full complement of a regiment. In fact, by the time Gettysburg happens, when the Civil War starts, when a regiment is raised, each regiment has about 1,000 men. And then through attrition over the course of the war, it gets reduced. Well, the entire brigade of the Irish Brigade at Gettysburg is comprised of only 532 soldiers. And at Gettysburg, they're going to take some pretty heavy casualties, 37%, and 198 killed, wounded, and captured. So already a small brigade. In fact, they're smaller than a normal size regiment at the size, when the Civil War starts. But throughout our talk here tonight, you're gonna learn about why the attrition has happened over the course of the American Civil War. But to get started, we want to go back a little bit farther back, and I'm going to turn things over to Rick and let him tell you a little bit about how the early Irish Brigade got started.
Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you to the York Civil War Roundtable for inviting me back. It's a pleasure. And while our topics last time were medical centered, this is certainly going to be different. And I think as we talk about the course of the and the service of the Irish Brigade in the American Civil War, I think it's important to spend a few minutes on the tradition of Irish soldiers fighting in foreign service. And I think most of us have heard that there were Irish soldiers in Europe, even Irish soldiers in the Mexican conflict. But there's a long tradition in Ireland for soldiers to leave Ireland and fight elsewhere. There were Irish soldiers fighting on the European continent for a number of centuries. Now, England had a law that if you were an English subject, you could not fight against the Commonwealth of England. And so when these Irish soldiers would get in boats to go to France, go to Belgium, go to Spain, they would often be listed as wild geese on the manifestos. And so that's why you often hear these, and I won't say mercenaries because they weren't necessarily always paid, but these foreign expatriates coming to fight. If you could go to the next slide, Chris. One of the phrases that as a student of Gettysburg and the American Civil War that you come across frequently when you read about or hear about the Irish Brigade is remember Fontenoy. I've heard that for a long time, but this talk allowed me to actually find out what Fontenoy was. And Fontenoy was one of these wars on the European continent, the War of Austrian Secession. I'm not sure I know much more about it other than that name. Fontenoy was a battle fought on May 11, 1745. The crux of it, ladies and gentlemen, was that there was a very large, unstoppable bayonet charge by the Irish Brigade serving for the French in that battle. And so the battle cry, remember Fontenoy, harkened back to this battle in 1745. And in the American Civil War, I think many of you know, the Irish Brigade fought with 69 caliber smoothbore buck and ball rifles. They were, if you will, shock troops. And the accuracy of that weapon was limited to about 100 yards. So we're going back to their tradition of charging against the enemy right in their face. Next slide, Chris. I want to spend just a minute, if I can, talking about something that impacts directly on the Irish in their service in the American Civil War. And this is an issue involving the Italian Risorgimento, the unification of disparate states in Italy to make a country. As you can see in the map, the green northern part of Italy, dominated by Piedmont and Lombard, wanted to join, if you will, the red southern part of Italy under King Emmanuel, and in the south, Garibaldi, to create a unified country. That action was opposed by Pope Pius. You can see the yellow belt of the Papal States across the middle of the Italian boot there. And in 1859, the Pope called for Catholic troops from multiple countries, including Ireland, to come fight against this act of Italian country unification. The Irish were more than happy to do that. Basically, Britain was supporting this unification effort so that Italy could be its own independent country. But yet they were never considering giving the Irish a chance to be their own independent country. So the Papal War of 1869 didn't last long, didn't go so well for the Pope. 3 weeks, 3 to 4 battles, the Papal States were defeated. Italy was united. But a battalion of 1,500 Irish soldiers, termed St. Patrick's Battalion, fought for Pope Pius IX in that battle. And I just want to say, Chris is my other host, and he has direct descendants who fought for the Garibaldi Guard at Gettysburg, the 39th New York, which I know from Chris's words have been characterized and repeated by the late great Ed Bars as a group of pickpockets, scoundrels, and thieves. So there's a lineage here that goes directly to Gettysburg. And this book that's illustrated on the right is a good source if you want to read some more about this. Next slide, Chris.
Rick, I told Ed Bars, one time that my great-great-grandfather was a member of the Garibaldi.
Uh-huh.
And he was happy to share that he had never met a descendant of the Garibaldi Guard, at least one that was willing to admit it.
Well, you're outed tonight. Chris, you want to take this one?
Sure. So, the soldiers in this foreign service that helped fight, with the, part of the Pope's war here were awarded a papal medal. And several of the men that had fought for the short time will end up coming to America, and they'll end up in the Civil War. And you might recognize some of these names from Gettysburg. In particular, Miles Keogh, shown here. He's the gentleman on the left. The mouse here, gentleman on the left here, part of Buford's staff. And of course, he will remain in the Army and eventually serve in the 7th Cavalry. And we'll talk a little bit more about him later on. But others that were involved in coming over were Patrick Clooney and Joseph O'Keefe. We'll hear a little bit more about some of them too.
Right. The next slide, I just want to spend 1 minute maybe on this topic, because I think this is very important in trying to decide why did these Irish immigrants fight for the North. There were many reasons, many social reasons, having to do with response to nativism and the know-nothing political scene. But one of the real drivers behind the Irish troops was the movement of Fenianism. Fenianism was basically the thinking that we are going to fight as professional soldiers, and we're going to learn what we can, and we're going to become very good soldiers so we can go back and create our own country and wrest it away from the control of England. The political arm of this was the Irish Republic Brotherhood. And we've heard those terms in other groups, the troubles of Northern Ireland versus the main, or within Northern Ireland, but this goes back a long time. This was, again, an attempt to get back to free Ireland from England. After the Civil War, a very interesting topic to read about are raids by the Fenians on British Canada in order to get back to the Brits. And interestingly enough, I think there were 3 or 4 of them. General George Gordon Meade was involved in putting down a couple of those early Fenian raids on Canada, but a topic to follow up on and read about. Again, just getting into the tradition of why the Irish fought in so many different places, what motivated them to fight for the United States of America, largely on the North.
Okay, so let's start getting into the Civil War time frame here. So the April of 1861, of course, you have the Fort Sumter and Lincoln calling for 75,000 volunteers to help defend the capital. And the 2nd Regiment to march from New York City in response to that call was the 69th New York State Militia. And it was commanded by this man, Colonel Michael Corcoran. And he was born in County Sligo, Ireland in 1827. So he's standing there on the left with his left hand on the wheel of this artillery piece. He and the officers and the men of the regiment, they built and they manned what was called Fort Corcoran in the spring of 1861 near the Capitol. The only officer on the far side of the gun, this man here, is Captain, also acting major at the time, Thomas Francis Marr, born in Waterford, Ireland. Okay. This is a photo from the Library of Congress collection. So the 69th New York State Militia is depicted here in this painting. This is a Don Troiani painting titled New York's Bravest. And Captain Marr can be seen here holding his sword. This is his sword here. Okay. And this is the first Battle of Bull Run, depicted as their afternoon fight on the plateau of Henry House Hill. Remnants of the 11th New York Fire Zouaves who had previously attacked against the Confederate remnants of B. Bartow, Evans brigades, and Jackson's newly arrived brigade and artillery. There stands Jackson like a stone wall. After several attacks and counterattacks, the 69th New York State Militia will try to fight as a rear guard, and then they will join the retreat. And Captain Marr is just to the left. The horse is down. He's extending his arm towards the colors of the 69th New York. During this action, Colonel Corcoran will be captured. He'll be offered parole in exchange for refusing to take up arms against the Confederacy. And Colonel Corcoran refuses that. He will not be exchanged until 13 months later. Once he is exchanged, he's appointed Brigadier General of Volunteers. and he recruits what he calls his Irish Legion, and commanding a division of the 22nd Corps in defense of Washington City. And it's during that time his horse actually falls on him as he was riding alone. He ends up fracturing his skull, and he ends up dying of that wound. So Captain Marr had his horse shot out from under him by an artillery projectile. And, at least one account states that he was able to make it off the horse before the horse fell on him. But he's acting as a major for the regiment. He springs to his feet and he says, "Boys, look at that flag. Remember Ireland and Fontenoy." Here he is shown just to the right of the flags, holding a pistol and a sword, going right along with the flags. This is a Rick Reeves painting titled "Remember Ireland and Fontenoy." Marr was born 1823 in Waterford Island. His family had a successful shipping business. He's an independent thinker, a passionate orator, and seems to have been a firm admirer of the American Revolution and the French Revolutions. And he hoped to bridge the Catholic and Protestant divide in a common goal of uniting all of Ireland's citizens and free men with their own non-denominational parliament. Now, one of the things that he does is he will make sure that the men are armed with the buck and ball rifles, the 69 caliber buck and ball rifles that I think Rick, you mentioned that a little bit earlier, right?
Yeah.
So we'll talk a little bit more about the effects of that, particularly in the upcoming battles. Next battle was Antietam that we want to talk about. I'm going to turn that over to Rick.
The Irish Brigade did see service in the Peninsular Campaign. They fought at Gaines Mill, Savage Station, but they really came into their own, if you will, although we'll talk about Medal of Honor winners. They came into their own in the Battle of Antietam. By this time, the Irish Brigade was formed by the three New York regiments we talked about, the 63rd, 69th, and 88th New York, and the 29th Massachusetts, not the 28th, but the 29th. The 29th Massachusetts was recruited in Boston. It was not Irish Catholic. There were many upper crust Boston Brahmins, and it was largely Protestant, but they, at least the accounts I've read, said that they didn't have a problem serving with the hardworking, dock-working Irish Catholics from New York City. We'll talk about how the brigade changes its structure after Antietam. But the Irish Brigade is in the 2nd Corps going into the Battle of Antietam, then commanded by Edwin Sumner. They're in the division of Major General Israel Fighting Dick Richardson, who is mortally wounded at the Battle of Antietam. The brigades include, the divisions include Richardson's, and then there are the other brigades that go along with that. The Irish Brigade is sent in, if you could go to the next slide, Chris. I don't.
French are the other two divisions.
Right. And those divisions were sent in rather piecemeal. You can see, Chris has the pointer. Sedgwick goes a little bit off the intended plan of attacking south towards the Sunken Road and gets annihilated in the West Woods. That's all detailed in textbooks of the Battle of Antietam. The Irish Brigade, along with Caldwell's Brigade and in reserve Brooks' Brigade under Richardson, are tasked along with French's division to attack the Sunken Road. And the Irish Brigade is on the right, Caldwell's on the left, and the 69th New York is in the post of honor on the right. Those Boston guys from in the 29th Mass, and then the 63rd New York and 88th New York from right to left. And if you've gone to Antietam and stood where that monument was in the previous picture, which is a little to the far, from the federal point of view, the left of the Irish Brigade line, there's a hill there that obscured the Irish Brigade coming up, and the Confederates in the sunken lane talk about first seeing their flags come up and then their heads, and then finally the troops. If you go to the next slide, Chris, there was a strong charge that General Marr wanted the right of the line to make, the 69th New York and 29th Mass, along the lines of what we talked about. Those buck and ball smoothbores are only accurate to about 100 yards. What General Marr wanted was 2 volleys fired and then a bayonet charge. Remember Fontenoy. Now, before this charge was attempted, and we'll revisit this at the Battle of Gettysburg, the 88th New York's chaplain, Father William Corby, decides to grant absolution, but he has to do it from horseback. If you go to the next slide, Chris, we'll come back to this one. There's Father Corby riding along the Irish Brigade line. You can see General Marr behind him, again with his sword raised. I dare say Father Corby finds a little more organized way to do this in a couple more battles. If you go back to the previous slide, Chris, but the 69th, that right-hand regiment, takes terrible losses. They go through 8 color bears. The brigade suffers over 500 casualties. And towards the end of the fight, Major General Richardson is mortally wounded. And that's when then Brigadier General Winfield S. Hancock is taken from the 6th Corps and put in command of the 2nd Corps, of this division, I'm sorry, to replace Major General Richardson. If you go to the next slide, Chris. We mentioned 3 people who fought the Papal Brigade in the Italian action. One of them was Patrick Clooney. He was a captain in the 88th New York. Now, the 88th New York was known as Mrs. Marr's Own. Their Irish flag, their regimental flag was presented by Mrs. Marr, and so they considered themselves to be an extension in her honor. The flag bearer went down to the 88th New York. Captain Clooney, who had a papal medal, and many of his fellow soldiers thought that imbued him with supernatural powers to not be hurt, picked up the flag. In this Bradley Schmel portrait, he's just been hit in the knee. He falls to the ground, won't get rid of the flag, gets up and starts to stagger, and is hit multiple times and falls dead on the field at Antietam. And again, this is a very upsetting thing to his fellow soldiers in the 88th New York. The casualties at Antietam are tremendous. It's the beginning of what we'll see happen to the numbers in this group of very bold soldiers. Now, after the Battle of Antietam, the 29th Mass is exchanged for the 28th Mass. The 28th Massachusetts that we know from further action, they actually started with Burnside down at the North Carolina expeditions, but they were put in after Antietam, and the 116th Pennsylvania joined the Irish Brigade to make those 5 regiments that we're familiar with. After the Battle of Antietam, they actually joined the brigade in Harper's Ferry. Next slide, Chris.
Okay, so we'll move on to Fredericksburg, which is yet another very bloody battle. The painting on the right is called Clear the Way. Depicts the Irish Brigade attacking the sunken road behind the stone wall at Marie's Heights. And we could probably do an entire session just on the attacks at Fredericksburg. This happens December 13th, 1862. The center regiment is the 28th Massachusetts. And if you look closely in the painting, it's a little hard to see maybe, but there's boxwood sprigs of green in the kepis of the soldiers. And this is something that General Marr had ordered so that they would help with unit identity, pride, cohesion. But this attack is going to obviously ultimately fail. One of the ironies of this whole thing is that the Confederates that are behind the stone wall at Fredericksburg are led by Brigadier General Thomas Cobb. Particularly the 24th Georgia is made up of Irishmen. And they're behind the wall, and they were crucial in stopping their fellow countrymen and any other Yankee unit that failed to take that position on that day. So General Cobb, Confederate General Cobb, is mortally wounded. A Colonel Robert McMillan takes over. He was born 1805 in country Antrim. That's the same as one of the majors that we'll talk about,
Right.
same county of birth. So you have commanders from the same county in Ireland facing each other during this battle. Another irony will take place a little bit later on when we talk about Gettysburg. These two units will meet again. But during the Battle of Fredericksburg, we talked about it a little bit, and one of the best ways to really kind of get a feel for what happened there is to talk about this young man. The picture on the right is actually a post-war picture, but this is Private William McCarter of the 116th Pennsylvania Infantry. And he wrote a wonderful memoir. There's a book that he wrote. It's edited by Kevin O'Brien, and primarily it has to do with the Battle of Fredericksburg, but just some wonderful accounts. And one of the first accounts that I wanted to share with you tonight is his description of General Hancock. And many of you know that General Hancock, General Winfield Scott Hancock, who is at Gettysburg, he's in charge of the Second Corps. He leads the Second Corps. McCarter will write that he cannot hide the fact that General Hancock reached the highest degree of perfection in cursing at his volunteer troops. In giving orders to his men on the march, drill, parade, or even the battlefield, he seldom did so without an oath of the most unpardonable nature. Indeed, he seemed to have gotten into such a habit of indulging in profane language that he could never address the troops without taking God's name in vain. General Hancock, in this respect, however, was not an isolated character in the Army of the Potomac. He's fully equaled by Generals Hooker and the deceased General Kearney. I had the privilege, I mean pain, of hearing Hooker a few days before the Battle of Gettysburg. Together with General Hancock, they seemed to receive an extensive education in profanity. So the stories that we hear about Hancock at Gettysburg apparently didn't start at Gettysburg. He apparently was one of the best cursors in the Union Army. So McCarter is actually, in part of the front line. He's wounded. He's actually wounded a couple of times. If you know the story of Fredericksburg, pretty much the troops are going to ground just to trying to do what they can to survive this onslaught of Confederate fire from behind the stone wall. And McCarter is wounded, and he eventually will make his way off the battlefield, and he will be seen by a surgeon, and the surgeon that sees him is Surgeon Abner Hard of the 8th Illinois. He locates one of the bullets and he cuts it out, and McCarter writes about how this was kind of a relief to him. It felt good to have that bullet out, and the doctor cleans up the bullet and hands it to him. McCarter puts it in his pocket, but apparently lost it somewhere along the way. Well, another part of the story, McCarter talks about he has his blanket with him, and an officer from the 69th New York Regiment will come in, and McCarter will ask the officer to unfold the blanket. And the officer asks him, why it was so heavy. How many blankets do you have here? He says, well, I only have one. When he unties it, 47 some odd bullets fall out. And the officer asks him, is this where the Irish Brigade keeps their bullets? McCarter replies, no, we have much more convenient place, and we get rid of it as soon as possible. But turns out those 47 bullets were because McCarter took his blanket roll and put it in front of him, and that was stopping the fire from the Confederates. So that blanket saved his life, and he said he was sorry to have left that behind somewhere in Fredericksburg, although it must not have been much of a blanket after they were done. He's not a real big fan of amputations, and some of that's discussed for some of his wounds. And in fact, one doctor comes to him holding in one hand a bloody knife or a saw, and in the other a newly amputated leg or arm dripping with human gore, and asked me if I wanted my arm removed, as the shoulder injury was causing me pain. McCarter declined, and the doctor turned away in disappointment when he refused to be a subject for his knife. So we know how you doctors are. Right?
Yeah, I don't know what to say to that. Yeah.
I'll bet you never carried an extra leg into the operating room before you put a patient on.
No, I did not. No.
Okay,
Good is right.
Well, because the casualties are so heavy, in December of 1862 at this fight, there's actually a grand requiem mass held at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York on Friday, January 16th, for the repose of the souls of the officers and men of the Irish Brigade killed in the war so far. And this is depicted in Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper. So, Rick, we've talked a little bit about some blood and guts, if you will, for a little bit. How about we talk about a little bit of fun? This being St. Patrick's Day, we would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about how these boys celebrated St. Patrick's Day.
Well, the Irish fought hard, but they played hard too. And it didn't take much for them to whip up an occasion and a party. Of course, on their patron saint's day, March 17th, every year, they would have some sort of an event. But in 1863, after the Battle of Fredericksburg and before the Battle of Chancellorsville, as the Army is refitting and gaining strength and confidence under their new commanding general, Joseph Hooker, there's an occasion for a very large celebration on St. Patrick's Day, just north of Fredericksburg, now near Falmouth. Now, the Irish Brigade had celebrations before at the Battle of Fair Oaks on May 31st, 1862. They were organizing a steeplechase when they were called into battle. And after the Battle of Fredericksburg, in an attempt to dedicate their new flags, they held a gathering in a church in Fredericksburg, but had to call it short because of artillery hitting the church. But now, March 17th, 1863 is going to be a landmark day. And we're going to talk a little bit about what they did 158 years ago today. Next slide. Like any good Irish celebration, it begins with a religious event. Father Corby, the same Father Corby who gave absolution at Antietam, and we'll hear about again, was the celebrant at what's called a military high mass, which is full of pomp and circumstance. And I thought it was interesting that instead of ringing bells in the middle of mass during what Catholics call consecration, they fired off cannon instead of ringing bells. I thought that was a nice touch. The night before the celebration, it became very important to decide who was going to be in charge of the punch. And I'm just going to read you a paragraph from Captain Cunningham's History of the Irish Brigade, written shortly after the Civil War. The evening previous to the races, we'll talk about those races in a minute, a committee was held on punch as to who was the best qualified to mix that important compound. It was unanimously agreed that the general and staff were the best judges and therefore the most proper to undertake it. It was ruled that the matter be left entirely in their hands. So Captains Gosson and Hogan were voted masters of ceremonies, in which they labored so diligently that before the mixture was complete, both felt overpowered by their labors and had to be relieved from duty. So the Irish are not going to short themselves on the punch. After the mass on March 17th, the festivities started, and there were many festivities, but the highlight of it, attended by about 10,000 people, including General Hooker and all the other luminaries of the Army of the Potomac, was a steeplechase race. We'll talk about some of the other things they did, but this is a Forbes drawing, isn't it, Chris? Isn't that what you found?
Yep, done by Edwin Forbes, and this is actually the grandstand for the steeplechase.
Right. And the steeplechase was just what you would expect. I mean, soldiers, officers of the Irish Brigade chose their mounts, and they held a race. General Marr, I think, was in charge of the course. If you go to the next slide, Chris.
Yep.
A picture of this. Chris, you talked about a couple of different types of races that they did.
Yeah. So, leading up to the main event of the steeplechase, you have these other side races, right? So you have to have a hurdle race. Pretty easy, create a fence and hurdles. These horses look like they're doing pretty well with that. And Edwin Forbes, I should state, was an artist, and I think the sketch artist, and these appeared in, I believe, Frank Leslie's, if I'm not mistaken. We have another one where you're jumping the ditch. The poor guy on the left didn't make it. The horse ends up in the ditch. The one rearing up, I don't know if he's going to make it or not, but the one right behind him, that doesn't look too good either.
No.
So that's another little side race. We have yet another called the mule race. And the mule race was a little bit different, Rick. You didn't run, obviously mules don't like to run. They're very stubborn. So the way that you won this race was coming in last.
Instead of coming in first, I see.
Right.
It looks like it's a bit of a struggle out there on those mules, Chris.
It is, and I love the action sketching here, right? If you look at this gentleman here, his hat flying off in the middle of the horse, throwing him over the head there. Just a great action sketch there.
Right. There were reports of, during this steeplechase, one of the surgeons was killed, and there were, quote, many broken bones, which got my attention. But this was quite an event, and I think I neglected to say, or maybe we haven't come to it yet, every man who was there after the mass was given 2 gills or a cup of whiskey to start the day. And so these guys were all pretty fired up for the events of the day, which started with these grand horse races.
Yeah. So we have a modern painting of it as well. And this is a limited edition print by Bradley Schmel. It's part of his Irish Brigade series, and it depicts a Lieutenant O'Connor on a Quartermaster's Bay Sharpsburg. I believe that's this first one here. Things are not going to be too good for Lieutenant O'Connor.
That might be one of the few broken bones there.
Followed by a Lieutenant Ryder on Captain Hogan's Napper Tandy. So that's this one. Captain Gossam, you remember him, Rick? He
was in charge of the punch. He must have bounced back.
Yeah, so he's up and available to jump on the horse. The horse he's riding is actual General Marr's horse, Jack Hinton. And Lieutenant Byron is on Captain Langdon's horse, Bill. Okay, so these makeshift jockeys, if you will. Looks like they got a pretty high fence to jump, and looks like everybody's having a pretty good time.
Yeah, they look like they've had at least 2 gills of whiskey to me.
That's right. What's a gill? I think we were talking earlier. Along with some of the other festivities, you mentioned that they started with a gill, but how much is a gill, Rick?
Well, a gill is a half a cup, according to what I learned. It's more than a wee dram, but it's a half a cup. So 2 gills, gets you off to a good start. Now, there were other events in addition to the steeplechase. Sack races. I can't imagine sack races with a bunch of drunk Irishmen, pig chases, Irish jigs. But one of the really stellar contests was to climb this greased 30-foot pole, reportedly in different sources, $20 to $50 at the top if you could get up there, and you also could get a 50 to 30-day furlough. Sources differ as to anybody really got that money. One source that I read said that the winner put sand in his pocket to use for traction. I guess that would mean reaching in your pocket and throwing sand on this greased pole, but it's not clear to me if anybody really got the prize.
Yeah, I don't think we found 2 accounts that agreed with each other.
That's right. Might have had to do with the 2 gills.
Exactly, yeah. Sounds like a good time, though.
Yes, the Irish love to party.
And of course, at the end, General Marr had to distribute the prizes. So that was very important, and Forbes captured that sketch as well.
And there was a massive feast at the end of it. It sounded like quite a day of fun and debauchery in the middle of the Civil War. prior to getting back to work.
So from there, we make our way to the Battle of Chancellorsville in early May of 1863. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on Chancellorsville because we want to focus a little bit more on Gettysburg. But the actions of the brigade take place around Banks Ford and around U.S. Ford. And this man, he's a lieutenant colonel at this battle, Lieutenant Colonel St. Clair Mulholland, the 116th Pennsylvania Regiment. He's sporting some pretty good chin whiskers there. Mulholland will actually later on write the regimental history for the 116th Pennsylvania. And he is involved in some action where he'll end up receiving the Medal of Honor for leading his regiment during the retreat. But there's some guns of the 5th Maine Battery that have been abandoned. And he's asked or ordered to go get those guns. And he and a group of his men of the 116th, I think 83 of them or so, if I remember correctly, will go and get those guns, pull them out of some mud and haul them off the battlefield. So he will help cover the retreat across the Rappahannock as the Union Army is making their way back across. So Mulholland, while he's a lieutenant colonel, there's some things that happen after Chancellorsville. General Marr is wanting to raise more troops, bolster up the Irish Brigade some, and he's actually denied that request to build the brigade back up. And long story short, he's pretty upset with that, and he'll end up resigning. With all the casualties that have happened so far, and with what's left of the group, there's a lot of reorganization. And one of the things that happens to Mulholland is he will actually take a rank of a major because of the reduced amount of men that he is in charge of at that point. So just not enough men left to have a lieutenant colonel commanding them. So that kind of leads us up to Gettysburg. And the brigade, after Marr resigns, the brigade is given to Colonel Patrick Kelly. And Colonel Kelly is born 1821 in Castlehacket County, Galway, Ireland. He's the first appointed lieutenant colonel. And then on October 16th of 1862, he becomes the colonel of the 88th New York Regiment. He succeeded to command after General Marr resigns. His favorite horse was named Fallabala, by the way, which is Gaelic for clear the way. Those of you familiar with the Gettysburg battlefield may recognize that saying on the 28th Massachusetts Monument. Today, it's also the motto of the 69th New York Army National Guard in New York City. So this is a descendant unit from the Fighting 69th. In September of 1863, General Marr actually writes a letter to President Lincoln recommending that Colonel Kelly be promoted to Brigadier General in command of the brigade, but there is no response from Lincoln on that matter. I'm sorry, there's Colonel Kelly. So Gettysburg, and as the units are marching north, trying to figure out where Robert E. Lee is. Of course, the Battle of Gettysburg has been described as everything from a meeting engagement to you name it. But essentially what's happened is the Union Army and Confederate Army have run into each other. The battle starts July 1st. Not everybody on either side is there yet, including the Irish Brigade. So the Irish Brigade on June 29th, as they're heading towards Pennsylvania, they will march 32 miles and they will end up in Uniontown, Maryland. June 30th is payday. It's a day of rest for them. But then on July 1st, they're told to march to Taneytown. And as soon as they get towards Taneytown, they're told they have to march another 17 miles. And they're going to end up near Big Round Top late on July 1st. So once they get to Gettysburg, they will, next day, July 2nd at 4 a.m., they're going to march another 2 miles. They're going to halt just behind where the Father Corby statue is. So I don't know if you can make out this white house here. That's the Patterson House. They're somewhere in this area. They'll march a little bit farther and turn west near what's known as the Hummelbaugh Farm and go into position and wait. And throughout the morning and early afternoon, of course, we have several different things going on in the battlefield, the least of which is General Daniel Sickles is going to start to move his troops out into his extended position, which is then going to create a lot of havoc and a lot of problems for the Second Corps, for the Third Corps, General Sickles Corps, and also for the Irish Brigade, part of the Second Corps. So it gets to be time when they are going to be needed and sent down towards an area known as the wheat field. But before they head down that way, Father Corby asked permission to give another prayer of absolution. So Rick, do you want to talk a little bit about this in this painting?
Sure. I don't know if you heard in Adam's introduction, but I am a graduate of the University of Notre Dame. So I've seen this painting in the museum at Notre Dame where it's hanging. It's also, I think, commonly noted. It's on the wayside in the wheat field. It's called Absolution Under Fire, and it depicts Father Corby standing on a rock, basically giving absolution, which means blessing the Irish Catholic troops in front of him, forgiving them their sins with the understanding that they will get to confession and talk to a priest as soon as they can. And that was very important in the minds of the Irish Catholic soldiers. However, in the text of his absolution, he does warn that you must do your duty or you will be denied a Christian burial. In other words, if you get shot in the back, you're not going to be given a Christian burial. So he raises his arm up to bless the troops, and we'll talk a little bit later on how he gets a moniker from that. We think this may have happened up closer to the Pennsylvania monument. The Irish Brigade was on the left of the Second Corps line, and it was sent down to the wheat field to basically start to fill the holes that General Meade had to do all day long on July 2nd. Interestingly, in the painting, as is often done by artists in the 1880s, the artist of this painting was an undergraduate at Notre Dame, only 20 or 21 years old, John Paul Wood, and he's the drummer boy to the right who painted that picture. And tragically, he was killed over Christmas break when an elevator he jumped into with other people in his parents' apartment building where there was a fire collapsed. And actually, Father Corby went to Chicago to say the funeral mass. But Absolution Under Fire by John Paul Wood.
And also shown is Winfield Scott Hancock.
Mm-hmm.
You remember that if you've seen the movie Gettysburg, he takes off his hat while this scene is taking place. But another couple items on the absolution. Father Corby said later that it was for everyone, north or south, right. Who were susceptible of it and who were all about to appear before their judge.
Right. It was for both sides.
Yep. So let's do a little map work. So the Irish Brigade under Kelly is part of Caldwell's division. And of course, they'll be wearing the red trefoil. And if you take a look at this map, all the maps that are in this series are done by Phil Lano. He graciously shares his maps with us to use for these presentations. And here in the middle of this map around 5 o'clock, you see Caldwell formed, but not moving yet. And This is not too far from the area of the Pennsylvania Monument, which of course Rick just mentioned was the probable location for the absolution. Well, 1 o'clock, Sickles moves forward. The Irish Brigade is actually ordered to help around 1 o'clock. So they'll form, they'll start to march, and then they'll see the 5th Corps moving in. So they'll return to their position and wait. I didn't mention at the beginning of the talk, but our colleague and good friend, John Fitzpatrick, I don't know if he's out there tonight, but John has a wonderful series on Gettysburg Daily, series of videos on the Irish Brigade and all sorts of different aspects of the Irish Brigade. And, in one of those videos, he says, this is a typical military maneuver, hurry up and wait. When they see the 5th Corps moving in, they go back to their position, and then about 5 o'clock, they'll get an order from Hancock, as Hancock will turn to John Caldwell and tell him, get your division going. And they're ordered by the left flank. Well, what that means is you basically turn left and you start marching. Now, the assumption in doing that is that your enemy troops are going to be to your right, so that when you go into position, everybody's right where they're supposed to be. And a couple things are going to happen in between as they march down. So in this particular map, you see that they're on their way down. And those of you that have ever been on a battlefield tour with me or seen one of my presentations, you know I love to give multiple choice. So I would be remiss tonight if I didn't give you a multiple choice. So once they start marching, okay, near where the modern day Hancock Avenue is, okay, it wasn't there at the time, of course, they have the option of cutting across the George Weichert farm and going through the John Weichert farm and ending up in the wheat field. So that's option 1. Their other option is they could have continued down on the other side, on the eastern side of the Weichert farm, and come out this way past what we call Munchauer's Hill here. So there's your multiple choice for the evening. Either way, they're going to end up on the front end edge of the wheat field. And they will go into position. And part of the problem now is they're near what's known as Plum Run. It's a small run of water, very, very, you can get across it very easily. But part of the problem is their position. Remember, they've been told to march by the left flank. Well, when they get near Plum Run, the order is to guide to the right, which means go into position. So the 116th will go in, the 28th Mass, which is the largest regiment, and then the 3 New York regiments, all kind of configured here. They now have a problem. And their problem is that there is essentially facing the wrong way. Their backs, in a sense, are turned to the enemy. So they have to flip around. Well, if you know anything about Civil War formations for battle, usually there's 2 lines, okay? Tall guys in the back, short guys in the front. And the reason for that is if you're going to fire a rifle over somebody's shoulder, you'd rather have the guy in front of you be smaller than you. So there's a lot of thinking that goes into this. And because they drill and they practice that time after time after time, they are very used to having taller guys in the back, shorter guys in the front. On this maneuver, when they're told to guide to the right, the tall guys are now in the front. The flags are now behind rather than in front. You follow the flag into battle. So the flags are in the wrong position. The file closers are in the front. They should be in the back. So rather than change everybody all around, what they decide to do is they decide to switch. They put the flags in the front, flag bearers go out front, file closers in the back, and then they proceed forward. The problem still remains, though, that you have your taller guys in the front and your shorter guys in the back. Now, Rick had mentioned that they're using the buck and ball, the 69 caliber buck and ball. This is a very effective weapon, short range. The idea is you mass your firepower. So when it fires, it's like a shotgun blast from all of these buck and ball. rifles, or all these buck and ball smoothbores. The problem with it is that your enemy, in this case, Kershaw, who they're going to end up meeting, is going to be using a rifled musket, which has a longer range, which means as soon as they get into the wheat field and they're crossing the wheat field, there's a whole lot of stuff happening. And folks, we don't have time even in an hour to explain it. I think Rick said it to me best earlier today. He said the best way to understand the wheat field is to get out and stand in the wheat field and really try to understand.
And keep moving around.
Got to move around.
Yeah.
You have elements of 3 different corps, all sorts of different divisions, all sorts of different regiments. Doesn't seem like there's any commanding presence in the entire wheat field. Now, one of the things that's happened is one of Caldwell's units under General Zook has been pulled off by a staff member of the 3rd Corps. And so Zook is not even with Caldwell. So you've got Cross, got his brigade, you've got Kelly's brigade, you've got Brooke in support, but Zook is nowhere to be found because he's off, and he'll end up in another part of the Stony Woods, Wood area there. So they go across the field. You have elements falling back, elements of the 5th Corps falling back. You have Winslow's battery, one of the very few batteries that's in that area, being pulled back because they're about ready to be surrounded and flanked. They're taking heavy casualties. They've used a lot of ammunition. They're being pulled back. So you have all this activity going on. And essentially, what's going to happen is Kelly's men are going to go forward and they're going to run into men of Kershaw's brigade, Southern Brigade of South Carolinians. This is the depiction of it in the Batchelder painting. This is his isometric map painting. And Batchelder painted this. It's maybe a little hard to see, but all the units are here. The 116th on the right, the 28th Mass, and then the other 3 units, 63, 88th, 69th New York. And over here, you've got Tilden and Schweitzer are the 5th Corps. They've been pulled off. So it's Kelly against Kershaw. And this particular painting is called The Pride of Erin. It depicts the Irish Brigade about to engage the 7th and 3rd South Carolina. Now, these are 2 of General Kershaw's regiments that had kind of veered off to go ahead and attack the Stony Hill. So this depicts the men of Kershaw's units waiting for the Irish Brigade to attack. So it's during this time that the Irish Brigade is going to take some heavy casualties simply because of the range of the rifles that Kershaw's men have versus the smoothbores. However, as we learned at Fontenoy, it's going to start to make a difference as soon as the Irish Brigade gets close. And when they get close and you have the point-on-point contact, also with Brooke coming in with his brigade on Kelly's left, they are able to push the South Carolinians off. The 7th South Carolina will retire first. They're going to head back towards the Rose Farm over here, followed by the 3rd South Carolina as Zook is involved in pushing them as well, but they're going to reform for yet another attack. And the attack that they make in this time is going to not only involve Kershaw's units again, it's going to involve men from Semmes, Southern Brigade, and can't see it on the map, but up north up here, coming down the Wheatfield Road essentially is their access, is the men of Wolford's Brigade, including the 24th Georgia. You remember them from Fredericksburg. So they're going to help push the Irish Brigade back again. So these units will meet up again. Well, a lot of casualties. Out of the 532 men that went in, I think our number was what, 198?
Yeah.
Yeah. So killed, wounded, and captured. So, very, very, not a lot of maneuvering. Big problem with the, the starting and stopping. big problem with the alignment. I think that alignment had probably the most impact on anything of all the different factors that happened during the Battle of Gettysburg for the Irish Brigade. It's just really, really difficult if, I don't know if we have any reenactors in the crowd, but really, really difficult to fire over the shoulder of somebody that's taller than you, okay, and keep cohesion on. One other factor is that they go into this fight with their bayonets fixed. Because the idea is, fire a couple times, like Rick told us about Antietam, fire a couple times, then go after them with the bayonet. Well, if you know the series of maneuvers it takes to load your rifled musket or your musket, trying to do that with a bayonet on the end, it's a little bit of a dainty affair, so you don't slice your finger off. And the tall guys in the back maneuvering their arms to try to do this, imagine there's probably a lot of little nicks and wounds happening all over the place. So it's just not what they practiced, just not what they were used to. So we're going to move on now to just go quickly over some of the battles after Gettysburg. I'll turn it over for Rick to take care of that.
Yeah, in the interest of time, I'll just try to hit on a few of these high points. I think the message we want to make sure everybody understands is the Irish Brigade was with the Second Corps all through the Civil War. They were a shell of their former selves, really after Antietam and after Fredericksburg. Gettysburg, their actions are very well known, but they were active in the rest of the battles of the war. The Overland Campaign, they were freshly recruited. They had more recruits, and so they were back up to strength. They were commanded by Colonel Thomas Smith. Moving on to Spotsylvania, they were part of Hancock's attack on the Mule Shoe. Colonel Burns had gone back to Massachusetts and had come back with a new green flag for the 28th Mass. Chris, if you can go to the next slide, just while Mulholland's history of the 116th Pennsylvania, and there are many people who say, be careful what you believe that Sinclair Mulholland wrote, but there's no doubt that at the Wilderness and then at Spotsylvania, this unit took very, very tremendous casualties. However, there was one incident I want to read to you about, and this happened at Spotsylvania. This is in the 116th Pennsylvania, talking about the bad luck of some of the soldiers. However, others were luckier, although his comrades in the 116th initially thought part of Robert Glendenning's head was blown off by a shell that whooshed by. The round merely took off the private's toupee. So that was a relief to Private Glendenning. Moving on through the Overland Campaign, they take part in the deadly assaults at Cold Harbor. Colonel Burns is mortally wounded. He's shot in the thigh on the 3rd and dies in Washington, D.C. on June 12th. I believe he had a compound fracture of his femur, which is largely an unsurvivable without an amputation, even with one. As the fighting moves south towards Petersburg, Colonel Kelly, who commanded the unit at Gettysburg, is killed on June 16th in some of the initial fighting around Petersburg. The numbers are now getting so small that the Irish Brigade is consolidated. The 3 New York regiments are brigaded with 6 other New York regiments. The 28th Mass, the 116th PA are sent out. And now the structure that we know from the early part of the war is now very different. The Irish Brigade does fight fairly valiantly in a rearguard action on the Second Corps' worst day of the war at Ream Station south of Petersburg in late August, where that blue horseshoe you see collapses and Confederates pour in. Next slide, Chris. The numbers do come back up again after November when they get more recruits and they get the 28th Mass back. The 116th PA still stays separate. At this point, the brigade is commanded by Colonel Nugent. whose picture is there. As the Petersburg campaign continues, they are reinforced with some of the heavy artillery units that we read about in the Overland and Petersburg campaign, the 7th New York Heavy Artillery and the 4th New York Heavy Artillery. These are kind of brought in and then taken back out again. They continue to fight all the way as the lines go around Petersburg to the west side as Grant tries to cut off the railroad connection coming into Petersburg. They fight at Sutherland Station. Next slide, Chris. This just depicts the siege tactics that we're all familiar with at Petersburg and the encircling movement around Petersburg that General Grant worked so hard to do. Next slide. When Petersburg falls and Richmond is evacuated, Lee retreats across Virginia. One of the last battles after Sailor's Creek before Appomattox is at Farmville, and the former commander of the Irish Brigade, who we know at Gettysburg as commanding in Hayes' division up near the Bryan Farm, General Smith, is actually the last Union general killed at for the Army of the Potomac. The Irish Brigade does participate in the Grand View in Washington, D.C. They break out these grand green Tiffany flags that have not seen combat. They put the boxwood sprigs back in their hats that they had at Fredericksburg because they're proud of that. And they march down Pennsylvania, commanded by Colonel Nugent again. So you can see a lot of back and forth with the commanders of the brigade because of the casualties. This is a list of many of their commanders. Robert Nugent survives the Civil War. Thomas Mard survives the Civil War. There are a couple of very good biographies on him. He goes out west and becomes, for all intents and purposes, the governor of Montana, and drowns when he falls off a steamboat in, I think, the Platte River up there. And there's actually an equestrian statue outside of the State House in Helena, the capital of Montana. So he's recognized out there. Next slide, Chris.
Yeah, so just a couple of photos real quick. Lieutenant Colonel James Smith took the 69th New York after the wounding of Captain Richard Maroney during the Battle of Gettysburg, and pretty much had it the rest of the war. The Library of Congress dates this somewhere between 1862 and 65. We believe it's probably closer to 65, possibly even for the Grand Review.
Right.
But shown as one of those flags is one of the green flags. Robert Nugent and staff. So Rick has mentioned him a couple of times. It's 1865. Inside of all their action, the Irish Brigade had 6 Medal of Honor recipients, and you can kind of go down through this list and see, but significantly Major St. Clair Mulholland, who we talked about, and along with him was First Lieutenant Louis Sechrist, who helped remove the cannon of the 5th Maine Battery. So let's go back to Notre Dame, Rick.
Yeah, just real briefly. I know we're running a little long, but the lower picture in the middle, Father Corby is the priest with the beard sitting on the far right of the picture. He went back to Notre Dame after the war, became the 3rd and 5th president of the University of Notre Dame. He succeeded Father Dillon, who was actually a chaplain in the Irish Brigade as well. He founded the law school there and began construction of the church that's the center of the campus there. Next slide, Chris.
So, we had this slide earlier when we were talking about the Papal Wars, and we mentioned Miles Keogh, Joseph O'Keefe, Patrick Cluny. You heard about Patrick Cluny. Miles Keogh will go on after serving on Buford's staff. He'll go on to finish up the American Civil War, and then will eventually become part of the famed 7th Cavalry only to be killed at the Battle of Little Bighorn. And it's at that battle that apparently his was one of, I think maybe even the only body that wasn't desecrated because of these medals. Apparently it was considered, that he had good medicine with these papal medals. I had the opportunity last year to visit Little Bighorn scholar Bruce Liddick, who is now passed away. And Bruce shared this picture with me. These are the actual medals of Miles Keogh. And, Bruce had a little smile on his face and he said, "Guess what I got to hold in my hot little hands?" And I said, "What's that?" And he showed me this picture. And he was instrumental in validating the fact that these were the exact medals. And you can see a picture of Keogh wearing them here on the left. One of the things that Keogh brought with him after the American Civil War was the song Gary Owen. He brought this to the 7th Cavalry. So if you've seen any of the movies about Custer, or any information about Custer, you always hear about the Gary Owen. And we could all sing a rousing 5 verses of it, but I think we're probably running short on time. So we'll have to save
maybe
that
next
for,
time.
yeah. Have to save it for afterwards. So that's going to start on me anyway. There we go.
All right, just to close up with Father Corby, there is a second statue to Father Corby, identical to the one at Notre Dame, standing on the campus at Notre Dame outside of Corby Hall. And if you've toured the battlefield at Gettysburg, you know that he is irreverently called Fair Catch Corby because his arm is up in the air, and everything at Notre Dame has to do with football. So Fair Catch Corby in 2 places, identical statues on a rock from the battlefield, supposedly.
So, as we kind of wrap things up, one of our colleagues, Jerry Hahn, who's a wonderful photographer, took this photo. And it's kind of interesting in this monument, depending on how the light hits it, you do see a green hue to it. So, some words from Father Corby. When this monument was dedicated, he was asked to come back. He did not say the mass for it, but he did make a few remarks. And he wrote about it in his memoirs later on. He said, "Imagine one who ought to be a grim old warrior standing before his companions in arms, addressing them after a separation that dated nearly a quarter of a century. At first, I got on reasonably well until looking over those assembled, the surviving members of our illustrious and numerous band, as it appeared in Alexandria, Virginia, in the fall of '61. I happened to make this statement: here is what's left of us. Where are the others? When I filled up very unexpectedly and could not speak for several minutes. I had struck a very tender chord. The celebrant, although 11 years older than I, wept like a child. And the brave old warriors before me, who had stood the shock of many battles, also wept." So folks, we'd like to thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
We, if we have time, Adam, we'll be happy to answer whatever questions we can.
Great. Thank you so much, gentlemen. I just lost the chat. There it is.
That'll shorten the questions.
All right. It's more of a comment. This is from Paul. He's a volunteer at the Antietam battlefield, I believe. And he had a comment about something that you said during that.
Right.
He said, Sedgwick didn't go off course. Sumner was directing Sedgwick and abandoned his following divisions of Richardson and French to guess where to go. They saw the 125th PA and others near Dunkirk Church in the distant front and thought they were Sedgwick, so aimed to the left, ending up at the sunken road.
Yeah, I don't pretend to be an expert on Antietam. If I'm even an expert on Gettysburg, you got to be, I guess, to pass the test. But I don't doubt that if Paul's a volunteer at Antietam, he can certainly back that up. I just know that they took tremendous casualties in the West Woods.
And I'll mention, if Paul as a volunteer, several times over the last and it's been quite a few years. Always around March 17th, one of the Rangers down there would lead a walk on the Irish Brigade. And if you've never done that, I don't know if they still do it, but if you've never done that, it's a fantastic walk. And you really understand how they're not seen until they're almost on top of the Confederates. But that last bit of space is very, very deadly. You can just understand it. So if, I don't know, maybe Paul could tell us if they still run those walks, but fantastic experience.
Scrolling down here. Okay. Two different questions. This is another comment. This is from Craig. He says that there is a statue of a mounted Mar at Waterford.
I didn't know that. I know there's some form of remembrance in Waterford. I mean, Mar was, as many young men in Europe, a revolutionary in 1848, and he got himself in trouble. There's a couple of really good biographies written on him. He ends up being sentenced to death, but that's lessened to being sent to Australia or Tasmania, which he escapes from and comes to New York City. Really a fascinating guy to read about. Controversial. We can't really sugarcoat. There are a lot of people that thought that he was not at the front like he should have been on many occasions. And as Chris will vouch for, nobody's really sure what happened on that boat on the Snake River. I think I said the Platte River. I think it's the Snake River. When he tumbled into the river, body never to be found again.
I'm scrolling through many positive comments. So again, thank you. I actually had a question myself. If I can find what I wrote. I was really struck by the action drawings that you showed tonight. Those were done by Forbes, is that correct?
Correct.
I was just curious where those are kept, like if they're in an archive or.
Yep, they're at the Library of Congress.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, if you do a search on, I think on the Irish Brigade, they'll come up.
Okay, so they're digitized. They're available online.
Yep. Yeah, I just find it absolutely incredible. Whether it's Wode or Forbes, how fast these guys. I mean, if you look at all the detail that's in there, they're capturing a moment and then they're on to other things and they capture it quickly. I'd be drawing stick figures.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah, I have no talent either. I mean, it's it's amazing that they could do that. I believe there's a hand. Michael Rigg is raising his hand. I'm thinking he wants to ask a question here. I'm just going to go into the attendees. Michael, if you're out there, I'm going to allow you to talk. You should be able to unmute, Michael.
Chris, I'm still here. I don't know if you can see me or not. I've pushed some button I shouldn't have here.
Yeah, I see you, Rick.
Okay, because I don't see myself.
Michael, if you'd like to unmute and ask a question, please go ahead. I think we had another raised hand. I think Bill Landis had raised his hand. So, Bill, if you'd like to ask a question.
Well, it was a wonderful presentation. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
However, we're going to talk about art because I happened to see a gallon print over Chris's back, and I have got many framed gallon prints that I tried to give away to my alma mater. Adam, you can help now. I've tried to give to my alma mater or sell back to the gallon shop, and I'm striking out. Does anybody, attendee or otherwise, or Adam, have any idea of who I could offer these to as a donation? I don't know. My family has no interest, and I don't know. Can anybody have an idea?
I've seen some Civil War roundtables and other organizations, that have used them for raffles, to raise money to help out the organizations. So maybe
All right,
something.
Adam, you're going into business, Adam.
I can't make any promises, but you have my email, I'm pretty sure, right?
Sure.
Okay.
And I just got a text here 1 second ago about York College, and I don't know anything about York College, although I was their neighbor for 15 years.
Well, I'm sure that there'd be, I mean, if it's something that could be donated toward an auction, that would be very popular. So I'm sure someone's out there who would be able to. But
thank you.
Yeah, another thought is the National Civil War Museum.
Up in Harrisburg.
Sure.
Yeah, they do
Right.
an auction every year. They might be interested.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure.
I think Paul has raised his hand, so I'm going to ask him to unmute. Paul, if you're out there.
Hey there. Thanks for calling. I'm driving, which is why I can't type. My question was about MAR not being able to recruit to refill the ranks. I'm assuming that was the standard union reason, that they didn't like to, they preferred to raise new regiments so they could have more political appointee regimental commanders.
Well, the philosophy in the North was they added regiments versus backfilling, whereas the South would send people back into the towns to recruit for specific units. What doesn't make a lot of sense, and I don't think Rick and I have an answer for, is why could they not have recruited further, but just have a different regimental number added to the Irish Brigade? And I don't have an answer. I don't think you do either, Rick.
I wonder if there was a political agenda going on. I mean, these guys were immigrants. Marr was a leader, but he was somewhat controversial. And as Chris said, I think they wanted to create new units rather than, although at the end they were bringing in new recruits, but General Marr obviously was not happy with the answers he got in Washington that spring of 1863.
Well, and perhaps the fact that Lincoln didn't promote Kelly,
right,
on Marr's suggestion, recommendation, that might be revealing in some way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. I think there's a question in the Q&A,
Yep.
Adam.
Yes, there is. I think at this point we'll answer that question and then we'll finish up for the night, just because of time. But this question is from Tom, and this is a question that I've been wondering. That I wondered at the beginning. I think you did talk about a few of these issues, but was there one primary reason that the Irish Brigade was fighting for? Was it anger at secession? Was it anti-slavery? That sort of thing.
I would say that we could probably do a whole lecture on that, and we're not going to start on that. It's a very complicated possibilities and realities. And it only gets more complicated after the Emancipation Proclamation, as the Irish are now not just trying to reunite the nation, but fighting for the emancipation of enslaved Blacks. And whether you talk about nativism, justifying their being in the new country, Fenianism, maybe I want to be a better soldier and go back and get those Brits. I think there are books written on that. The Eagle and the Harp is a very good book about it. It's very complicated, very interesting.
Yeah, we have the whole question of the draft riots,
Sure.
obviously, that took place in New York.
Yeah, the Irish didn't look very good there.
Right.
And don't forget, there's Irish on both sides.
Right.
Yeah. And you made a great point about that tonight.
Right.
Right. Wow. Interesting.
All right. Well, thank you all very much again. Thank you, Chris and Rick. I really appreciate this tonight. I think we might have beat a record tonight with the number of participants online. I counted 71 attendees at one point. So this is, if you pick the right topic at exactly the right time.
On the right day.
On the right day, exactly. Yeah.
With
I
green
think we can
beer.
have great results. And with green.
Yeah,
It's hard to get.
We'll have a singing of the Gary Owen if you want.
I need a few more green beers before I'm going to subject people to that.
A few more to listen to me sing, right, Rick? Yeah. Adam, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. Thanks for everybody attending.
Great. Well, we hope to have you back.
Surely.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Like I said at the very beginning, our next presentation will be on April 21st. We'll be talking about Ned Spangler. So I hope to see everybody back. All right.
Thank
Have
you.
a great night. Enjoy responsibly.